Winter had settled over the town like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Snow pressed against the windows in thick layers, muffling every sound outside. I was home alone for the first time in months. My parents had gone on a trip, leaving me with the house and a growing sense of unease. The kind of unease that makes shadows move differently, that stretches the ordinary into something threatening. I had always been curious about the attic, but the last tenant had left it locked for reasons I could only guess at. Now, with the house empty and the wind rattling the windows, I couldn't resist. I climbed the narrow stairs, flashlight in hand. The attic smelled of dust and old wood, of things forgotten. There, in a corner behind a stack of abandoned furniture, I found it, a small wooden chest, locked but not tightly. The latch gave way with a soft click. Inside were notebooks, papers, and folders, yellowed with age and marked with cryptic labels. My heart raced. Most of the papers were diagrams, lists of names, addresses, and strange codes that made no immediate sense. The handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive, and I couldn't stop flipping through the pages. Some of the entries described operations I knew weren't legal: experiments, transactions, surveillance. Names of people I didn't recognize, locations that didn't exist on any map I knew. There were warnings scribbled in the margins, sometimes in red ink: "They are watching. Leave it alone. You shouldn't be here." I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was just someone's paranoid journal. But the air in the attic had grown colder, and the shadows seemed to thicken at the edges of my vision. I heard a noise from below, footsteps, faint and deliberate. I froze, heart pounding. I was supposed to be alone. My parents were miles away. My mind raced. The papers were meant to stay hidden, and maybe I had triggered something by touching them. I set the notebooks down, but when I glanced back, they had shifted. Not moved in a way a draft could explain, but deliberately, as if someone, or something, had been rearranging them. The red warning page was now on top, staring at me like an accusation. I wanted to leave, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. There was a pattern, a code in the papers, something that hinted at a network of people operating in secret, hidden even from law enforcement. The thought made my stomach churn. I wasn't supposed to know this. Whoever had written these things had vanished, or maybe they hadn't. And maybe they were still watching. I spent hours in the attic, reading and deciphering, until fatigue forced me down the stairs. The house felt different, colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were aware of what I had seen. The notebooks were still on the table in the living room, pages spread as though someone had been working while I wasn't looking. My mind refused to rationalize it. Nothing about that night felt normal. Outside, the wind clawed at the roof and windows. Every branch scraping against the glass sounded like footsteps, deliberate and measured. I kept telling myself it was just a winter storm, but the unease settled deeper into my chest. I kept checking the windows, the yard blanketed in snow. Shadows shifted across the trees in ways the wind couldn't explain. My pulse raced, and I realized I hadn't felt safe since I opened the chest. The papers hinted at a secret operation, something that shouldn't exist. Names of people, movements, and coded messages suggested surveillance, extortion, or worse. As I pieced it together, a sinking realization came over me: the notebooks weren't just history. They were instructions, and I had become part of the story. Whoever had left these had tracked, followed, and perhaps even watched the house. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to return the notebooks to the chest, but the red ink warning page slipped from my hands, fluttering to the floor. I bent to pick it up, and in that instant, a shadow passed across the living room window. Not a branch. Not snow. Something human-shaped, moving deliberately, stopping at the edge of the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I was home alone. I had no one to call. By morning, the storm had cleared, and the yard looked peaceful. The shadow was gone. The notebooks lay on the table as if nothing had happened. But the questions remained. Who had been watching? How much did they know? And would they return, now that I had seen the truth? I haven't touched the papers since that night. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind rattles the windows or the floorboards creak, I swear I can hear the scratch of a pen, and I know, deep down, the operation isn't over. Winter had a way of making the world feel smaller, colder, and heavier. I was home alone for the first time since moving into the old apartment, the kind of place where the radiator clanged like it was part of the building's nervous system, and the wind rattled the window frames so hard it sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. Snow had fallen heavily that evening, coating the streets in silence. The kind of silence that makes every creak of the floorboards feel amplified. I had been avoiding the attic for days. Something about the idea of going up there felt wrong. The apartment had been empty for months before I moved in, and the previous tenant had left behind a collection of boxes and dusty furniture that no one had touched. Curiosity finally won over. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook of my own, I climbed the narrow, twisting stairs. The attic smelled like cold wood, mothballs, and forgotten things. That's when I saw them, a stack of leather-bound notebooks tucked into a corner, almost hidden behind a broken trunk. The covers were scuffed, the pages yellowed, and the ink inside was faded but legible. At first I hesitated. Normally, I would have walked away. But the winter night outside pressed against the thin walls like a warning, and something in the notebooks called to me. I picked up the top one. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, like it belonged to someone meticulous, obsessive, even. The entries detailed operations, experiments, and meetings that sounded illegal in every sense, mentions of substances that shouldn't exist, names of people who apparently didn't officially exist, and locations that seemed off-limits. The more I read, the colder the room felt. Every sentence made my pulse tighten. I couldn't stop. Hours passed without me realizing. Snow had piled against the attic window so thickly that the room felt completely sealed off from the outside world. Every scratch and scuttle of the old buildings would make me jump. And then, at the bottom of the stack, I found one notebook that was different. The pages were torn and tattered, but between the lines were warnings written in red ink: "Do not follow. They are watching. Leave it." I froze. For the first time, I felt like the room was alive. Like someone, or something, was listening. I laughed nervously at myself and decided to put the notebooks back. That's when I heard it, a soft thump from below, like footsteps on the creaky floorboards. My heart jumped, and my breath hitched. I wasn't supposed to be here alone. I wasn't supposed to read these things. And yet I couldn't stop. I told myself it was probably just the wind. The snow was heavy, the branches outside scraping the roof. But then I heard it again, a deliberate, slow shuffle, coming from somewhere in the apartment below. I froze, clutching the notebooks like a shield. Every instinct screamed to run, but I didn't know where to go. The front door was 2 flights down, and I didn't want to risk being seen. I crept down the attic stairs, keeping the flashlight close. The apartment was empty. Or so I thought. The notebooks had left a mark on me I couldn't shake. One entry described how someone had observed the building from the street, checking every window, every exit. I hadn't noticed anyone earlier, but that didn't mean I wasn't being watched now. The snow outside reflected the dim light of a lone street lamp. I swore I saw a shadow moving just beyond the window, a figure crouching low, silent, impossible to identify. My stomach sank. The notebooks had mentioned people like this: agents, observers, enforcers of rules no one outside knew existed. And somehow, by touching those pages, I had crossed into their world. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself I was imagining things. But when I returned to the living room, the notebooks had shifted. Not moved, they hadn't been touched by human hands, but rearranged. The warning page faced up, staring at me like a silent scream. My flashlight flickered. My hands shook. I spent the rest of the night barricaded in my bedroom, listening. Occasionally, the wind, or footsteps, would scrape against the walls. The notebooks sat on my desk, unopened, but I knew they were calling to me. I knew that if I ignored them, I'd never know the full truth. But the truth had a cost. I had glimpsed the edge of something far older and far darker than I could understand. By morning, the snow had stopped. The apartment was quiet again. I dared to open the door and look around. Nothing had changed. No sign of anyone outside. The notebooks remained, silent and menacing. I didn't know what to do with them. And even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about the operations detailed in those pages, the shadows watching from the snow, and the warning, "Leave it!" I haven't touched the notebooks since that night, but sometimes, when the wind rattles the windows or a floorboard creaks, I swear I can hear the scratching of a pen, and I know they're still waiting. Waiting for me to read just one more page. Winter had a way of making the world feel smaller, colder, and lonelier. The wind slammed against my old house like it wanted inside, rattling the windows in that way that makes your skin crawl when you're home alone. I had planned a quiet weekend to catch up on some writing, but instead, I found myself staring at the attic door, wondering why I'd never fully explored it before. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed into the dusty space. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, old trunks with rusty locks, and piles of yellowed papers filled the cramped attic. My uncle had died last year, and in the weeks after, I'd avoided this room, afraid of the memories it might hold. But tonight something had drawn me here, a mixture of boredom, curiosity, and a strange unease I couldn't shake. I opened the first box. Inside were stacks of notebooks bound with fraying twine, and folders stuffed with documents that smelled faintly of mildew and ink. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the ramblings of an eccentric man. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized these weren't ordinary diaries. They contained detailed accounts of things that didn't belong in family history, mentions of clandestine operations, hidden locations, and people who disappeared without a trace. Some entries were mundane, lists of addresses, names, dates, but others were darker. One notebook described a man covered in blood, moving silently through a neighborhood in the dead of night. The description was meticulous. The blood did not belong to him, yet he walked as if nothing had happened, leaving a trail of chaos wherever he went. My stomach twisted as I read on, noticing the same pattern repeated in different notebooks: bodies unclaimed, investigations that went cold, mysterious disappearances that were never solved. By the time I reached the last box, my hands were trembling, and the wind outside had picked up, rattling the shingles like a warning. A loose sheet of paper fluttered to the floor. On it, a crudely drawn map led to a warehouse not far from the town's edge, marked with strange symbols and the words, "Do not enter. They are watching." My pulse raced. I wanted to leave the attic, close the door, and pretend none of this existed, but a part of me knew that curiosity had its claws in me, and it wasn't letting go. By midnight, I was alone in the house, the rest of the town swallowed by snow and silence. My parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving me with the creaks and groans of an old home that had too many secrets already. The attic notebooks lay spread across the living room floor, a chaotic map of hidden crimes and strange, untraceable people. I tried to convince myself it was just stories, fiction my uncle had invented, but the level of detail was unnerving. I picked up the most recent notebook, its spine cracked from age, and read an entry dated only a few weeks before my uncle died. It described a transfer of people who were taken from their homes at night and left nowhere. The handwriting grew frantic toward the end. "He's coming back. He always comes back covered in blood that isn't his. No one ever finds the others. I can't stop him." A sudden noise upstairs made me freeze. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then, something scraped along the floor above me, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded. I wasn't supposed to be hearing this. No one was supposed to be home. The house felt enormous, the shadows stretching longer than they should, crawling along the walls. I tried to tell myself it was imagination. I even laughed at the absurdity. A man I'd never seen, mentioned in notebooks, shouldn't be able to haunt my quiet winter night. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes kept drifting to the notebooks, as if the words themselves were alive, warning me, urging me to leave before it was too late. Then I noticed it, a single page tucked between the folds of a folder, one that I hadn't seen before. It was a list of names, scrawled hastily, each crossed out except the last one, mine. My blood ran cold. The snow outside muffled the world, leaving me alone with the weight of what I had uncovered. I wanted to burn the notebooks, throw them in the fireplace, and pretend this was just a bad dream, but I didn't. I couldn't. Hours passed. I stayed awake, shivering under blankets, listening to the house breathe around me. The map, the symbols, the blood-stained man from the notebooks, they all circled in my mind. I kept thinking I heard footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving in the attic. I convinced myself it was the house settling. It wasn't. By dawn, I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop looking at the notebooks. The last page I read that night ended with a question. If he ever comes back, will anyone notice? I still don't know if anyone would. And even now, weeks later, when the wind howls through the trees, I feel it watching, waiting, and I know, some mysteries are never meant to be solved.